Okay, so first, writers in Hollywood went on strike in May, and now Hollywood actors want a new deal with the major studios. Honestly, I can't think of a time that there's been this much uncertainty in film and TV. Today on the show, you'll hear about the chaos in the industry and what comes next. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, let me just timestamp this for you. We're talking right now. It is mid-morning on Thursday, and we are in the midst of a story that could change any minute. Okay, so the SAG-AFTRA union, that's the big actors union, has spent weeks and weeks bargaining with major studios and streamers. And last night, the deadline passed. The deadline for strike passed without a new deal. The SAG-AFTRA board is going to meet today to vote on a strike. All along, the actors have been very clear that they're ready. They're ready to join the writers on the picket lines. And this could mean that for the very first time in 63 years, both actors and writers could be on strike at the same time. Teri Hart is here to unpack this wildly chaotic moment we find ourselves in. Teri, thank you so much for just making sense of this every time.
Hello, Elamin.
Hello. Let me start by saying there's been a lot of secrecy around the negotiation with the actors, but one of the sticking points that we kind of keep hearing about is like this idea of compensation. What is going on there?
So yeah, there has been a media blackout, so we haven't heard a lot, but we do know about the fact that the model has changed significantly since streamers started making content, specifically around residuals, Elamin. Those are the fees that actors are paid when the show that they're on is played repeatedly and for years and years. Like hit shows. When you're on a hit show, you get paid. Like Orange is the New Black, right?
Yeah.
Hit show. But those actors are making a pittance. Emma Miles, who played Leanne, who was the Amish meth addict on the show, she was on the show for 6 years. And last year, she made $20 in residuals. Compare that. She made $600 a year for a few guest spots on Law and Order. So it's outrageous.
Yeah. I like the whole thing is like if you spend a long time on a show, it used to be the case that you could make a living off the episodes that keep getting re-aired because they keep reusing your work. That is not the case with streamers. We should also talk about artificial intelligence because that is an issue here. What are the actors worried about there?
So this actually could be the biggest issue. There was a Deadline article a few days ago, and a SAG-AFTRA member said, and I'm quoting here, that actors see Black Mirror's Joan is Awful, and I know you've talked about that episode here on Commotion.
Yeah.
They see it as a documentary of the future with their likenesses sold off and used in any way producers and studios want. That's pretty scary. And another actor said, we see what's coming. They can't pretend we won't be used digitally or become the source of new, cheap AI-created content for the studios. So essentially, actors are looking for a contract that would require that they are being paid for any AI-generated use of their likeness.
Are we hearing anything about the studios and where they are on this or no?
Well, we aren't hearing anything, but the fact that talks have broken down and they did not meet that deadline indicates that the studios are holding firm and not compromising.
Teri, we should say, like, what is potentially at stake here? Like, what kind of impact would an actor strike have in the immediate future on people who are just like waiting for the next season of their favorite show?
Okay, so let's make this super clear, right? Everything stops. Everything. Appearances, interviews, shooting, everything stops. And the domino effect of this is huge. Comic-Con is right around the corner. We traditionally see like a parade of actors showing up in Hall H, making casting and production announcements. That's not going to happen. You think about TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival, beginning September 7th. And not only will this impact actors not coming, if the strike is still happening there, frankly, if the strike happens, because we have a vote later today, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But the movies that the studios are negotiating with the festivals right now, this is going to impact that because they're going to be, concerned about bringing a film to the festival when they potentially can't use the talent in the film to promote it.
Right.
So it is, and, release dates are going to change. We already know just today, Universal Pictures moved the red carpet for Oppenheimer in London from 5:45 to 4:45, 1 hour, 60 minutes, hoping that their cast, that is like Matt Damon, Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, Florence Pugh, they're hoping that they'll still participate in that red carpet without breaking the union rules. And, another big movie that's opening, the Barbie movie, the cast has been working that. My goodness.
They've been on this promotional cycle. That's right. Because they would have to stop if the strike happens, right?
Correct. And all of this feels a little bit early. Both Oppenheimer and Barbie don't open until July 21st. This is usually like a week lead up when they're doing this. And we're, a little bit more than a week out, and Barbie has been on the circuit for weeks now.
Yeah, we've heard about Barbie at this point. We've heard that movie's happening. We've heard that Oppenheimer is happening. But there's something to be said about the fact that literally the actors would have to leave a red carpet if, suddenly this strike does end up being called, which is a very dramatic thing. I'm really excited to watch this red carpet just to see if they get literally pulled off the carpet there. Teri, the Hollywood writers' strike started a couple of months ago. What does the actors' strike mean for them, do you think?
So the issues that they're fighting for are similar, basically money and AI. And you have to see this as solidarity, right? Like you have to see this as they're supporting each other. And you have to imagine that this strengthens the Writers Guild position. But you also have to recognize that the AMPTP, who they're negotiating with, aren't budging for either the 11,500 members of the WGA or the 160,000 members of SAG-AFTRA.
Wow. So, obviously, a lot to watch for here. What are the next steps in terms of waiting for what is the next thing that's going to unfold?
So to be very clear, at this exact moment, a strike hasn't happened yet. A vote is happening with the SAG-AFTRA members, and we will have a press conference at noon Pacific time, and that will let us know how the membership has voted. But all indications are that there will be a strike and that the actors will be joining the writers on the picket lines.
Every time there is an entertainment strike that is looming, we flash the bat signal, and then you come help me make sense of it. So I appreciate you being here. Teri, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Elamin.
Of course. Teri Hart is an entertainment reporter at Super Channel. By the way, we're going to be having a wider conversation about Hollywood and power in Hollywood that is happening tomorrow on the show, so please be there for that. But in the meantime, for more on this conversation about the actors' strike that is potentially looming, the latest on the story, go to cbcnews.ca. Intergalactic planetary, intergalactic, intergalactic, planetary.
Don't you tell me to smile. You stick around and make it what you want. No one's beyond what you can tell. Maybe it's because I'm so versatile.
Hey, that's a bit of Intergalactic from the Beastie Boys. It is off their 1998 album Hello Nasty. If I can just set the scene for you in 1998, right? The Beastie Boys are already at that point seen as this iconic and singular group. They embody punk rock and 80s era rap flows and also pulled together the spirit of New York City. And then they put out this record in 1998, Hello Nasty. Hello Nasty turns 25 this week. Niko, Stratis, and Commotion's own Stuart Berman belong to Generation Beastie. They've got a lot to say about Hello Nasty and where it stands within the larger Beastie Boys musical legacy.
Beastie Boys were a group that I grew up on. They were one of those groups that was always on. Like when a kid would have a house party because their parents were away, and there was like a boombox we brought into the dinner table, and everybody would move beer cans out of the way, and you've got music going. That was the first time I ever heard the Beastie Boys, and then it just sort of I was always curious about this band. They would be on mixtapes, and I'd have to be like, well, who is this group? Some guy had made my sister a mixtape and put a song called Professor Booty from the tail end of a Beastie Boys record.
Professor, what's another word for pirate treasure?
Well, I think it's booty. Booty.
And I was like, well, who is this band? They were always the who is this group sort of thing, because it was new to me, it was a sound that didn't sound like a lot of other stuff. So I was always sort of curious about them. And then by the time Hello Nasty rolled around, I knew who they were. And I was just like, everybody was just so ready for this record because it had been years by the time they'd put out a record.
Yeah. Stuart, what's your relationship to the Beastie Boys?
I mean, they were literally the soundtrack to my life growing up. I mean, I felt like I grew up with the Beastie Boys, like lockstep with them.
Yeah.
You know, I was 12 when License to Ill came out.
4 and 3 and 2 and 1. And when I'm on the mic, the suckers run. Down with rockin' like Dan, you ain't. And I got more juice than Picasso got pink.
And that was a huge record in the North York bar mitzvah party circuit. You know, perfectly juvenile for us kids.
Yeah.
And then when Paul's Boutique, their sound and vision expanded. They got, you know, a lot more psychedelic. And, you know, that kind of dovetailed with my own, like, appreciation of, like, the album as an art form.
Yeah.
You know, they were sampling a lot of, like, Beatles and Pink Floyd on that record. And, you know, that's where my head was at that point. And then Check Your Head and Ill Communication arrived, like, in prime mosh pit years for me.
So you're telling me that somewhere out there are pictures, videos of you moshing to So What You Want. That's what I'm picturing in my head here.
You know, if you find some old maybe Lollapalooza 93 footage, you might see me like drowning in a fishbone mosh pit as I was like trying to cling to life.
I love this image.
Clinging to life in a fishbone mosh pit is just, if you have a memoir and you're like, I need a title, I feel like we just discovered it.
It's a perfect title. Okay, so let's come back to Hello Nasty. It's their 5th album, comes out in 1998. Let's talk about where the Beasties were at that point in their career.
They had achieved this status that is like, I don't want to say mythical because maybe this puts too much on their shoulders, but, you know, like they were legendarily, they would take their time between records. It had been 4 years since their previous real record. You know, they had put out an instrumental record called The In Sound From Way Out in 1996. And people either really liked or really did not like their instrumental stuff.
Yeah.
But, you know, like they had their own magazine.
Yeah.
They had their own record label. They had all these things. Like they had this amalgamation of like punk rock culture and hip hop culture because those were the two worlds that informed them. So when Hello Nasty dropped, like I was working in a grocery store in 1998, and this person that I worked with, she called me on my line, and I worked in the bakery. She was in the meat department, and she called me and she was like, "We have to go to the record store at lunch because Hello Nasty drops today." It was a Tuesday. That's when records used to come out.
Back in the golden days.
Back in when things were good, when we had a proper country, and we go and buy the record, and it was a event. Like you were like, "Oh, this thing is happening. These legends are making another appearance."
We asked both of you to give us your favorite cut from Hello Nasty. Stuart, this was your pick. Flow and Prose, a Hello Nasty fave from Stuart Berman. Stuart, why this one?
I think this track kind of opened up an interesting new avenue for the group, which they didn't end up really following. But, you know, coming off of the double shot of Check Your Head and Ill Communication, those were two similarly styled records. Some would say, like, Ill Communication was the first record where they didn't, like, reinvent themselves again. They kind of, like, went back to a proven template. And in this case, you know, by this point, Beastie Boys records were, you know, pretty segregated between their sort of, like, tentpole rap tracks and then there's sort of instrumental, funky interludes, which, you know, kind of like the intermission music between tracks. And I feel like, you know, this song kind of folds those two identities into one another. And also it's sort of a different way of rapping from MCA. You know, lots of Beastie Boys tracks kind of have the same style of like, now we're going to talk just like this and punctuate the point just like this. And this was like a totally different kind of flow coming from MCA. So I felt like it was an interesting way for them to like sort of retain their identity as a rap group, but, you know, while still experimenting sonically.
All right, here's a bit of Niko's pick. This is Body Movin'.
Ready? 1. You will do this 4 times with the left, 4 with the right, then 8 times with both, then repeat.
Niko said it's time to hear some steel drums. Niko, why this song?
I mean, you just mentioned the steel drum, and I feel like that. No, like when I first heard this record, like talking about this idea of like these tentpole rap songs and whatever that they would do.
Yeah.
The first time I ever listened to this record, you're hearing all these like the songs in the beginning of the album, Remote Control and all these other songs. I'm like, okay, I'm into this. This feels really sharp. And like every song sort of felt like a conversation with the other. And then you hit this one, and you're like, they're going for it in this really big and bold and interesting way that I really liked. It had the video. They were like both videos, like this and the video for Intergalactic, both were like, they were huge on Much Music, and it was like, MCA is leaning into his Nathaniel Hornblower persona where he's pretending to be, a Swedish guy. It is so much of the big bombast of the Beasties, but also like, the steel drum, and there's all these other elements that play there. And I think it's this really good amalgamation of what makes them so good. It's like, they're big and they're fun and they're loud and they're bold, but they're also like, they're interested in a lot of stuff, and they want to layer that in there, and they want to hide stuff that you might not find, on your first listen. You might not find it for 20 years, but eventually you will notice it.
If you're just joining us, my name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. It is the 25th anniversary of the Beastie Boys album, Hello Nasty. We're talking about its impact and legacy with Stuart Berman and Niko Stratis. Stuart, you talked about Hello Nasty being a sign of the Beasties' decline, or at least the beginning of that decline. What makes you feel that way?
I mean, this is a band that had such an incredible run over their first 10 to 12 years. Yeah. Inevitably, you hit a peak and then, things start going down.
Yeah.
I think, they are pivoting away. Like, it's kind of like, all right, we did this thing in the past. Everyone else is running with it now. We're going in this direction.
Yeah.
And both, in terms of like going back to the early 80s, which wasn't a big thing in the late 90s to be pulling from the early 80s. They kind of like, were ahead of the curve on 80s nostalgia.
Yeah.
But they were also, they had their ear to the ground of what was happening underground at that time. And and what was happening there was a lot of indie rock bands were starting to pull from like Brazilian Tropicalia music and dub and like easy listening records from the 50s and 60s. The Beasties were definitely like trying to ride that wave as well at the same time, this sort of like crate digger culture.
Yeah, Niko, what do you make of this moment in terms of, so it's 1998,
yes.
the Beasties are kind of competing in an environment, of a sonic environment that they kind of helped shape to begin with.
I mean, I always wonder about the competing idea, because I never really fully thought that the Beasties were ever really competing with anybody but themselves. They always sort of seemed to be this band that was doing...
Not like a charts competitive band.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, they're always very much doing a thing that they want to do. They're exploring avenues. Their entire career, like from Paul's Boutique on, is very much a story of three people specifically who only will work with each other and, various producers that are like exploring the roads that they want to explore. They're digging through the crates they want to dig through. They're playing the sounds they want to play. And I feel like on Hello Nasty, they're really bringing that together where they're making these big singles. They're making Body Movement and Intergalactic, but they're not making singles the way that other people are making singles in the late 90s. This like these last couple of years as we move from the 90s into the 2000s is a really interesting era of pop music because it is, like you say, like rap is rising in a huge way. Punk rock is rising in a huge way. Yeah. We're changing the way we talk about pop. We're changing the way we talk about pop stars. The internet is coming online. We're moving into a digital culture, and they're doing this thing, like you say, they're pulling from Tropicalia. They're pulling from all these things that nobody else is pulling from, right? They're digging stuff out of a crate.
I should say my introduction to the Beastie Boys was, and I don't feel good about this, what came a little bit later is 2004, I believe, 2005, which is to the album Five Boroughs, and in the Five Boroughs, specifically the single was Check It Out, which is like generally considered, just among the poorer offerings of the Beastie Boys.
It's boilerplate Beasties.
It's
I remember having that feeling when that record came out. It's like, these guys have been away for 7 years, and the only thing they can come back with is check it out.
Yeah.
Like, that's the best they could do after 7 years.
It does feel like kind of like a yikes moment. And then people were like, hey, this is the Beastie Boys. They're legendary. I was like, doesn't feel like they are. And of course, going back again and assessing the music of 100%, but that's not the album that you would choose.
Yeah.
But we got to talk about Hello Nasty in the general sort of Beastie Boys discography. Where do you put it, Stuart?
I mean, I do think it's sort of a second tier record in my opinion. I mean, just because the run from Paul's Boutique to Ill Communication was just like, it's among the greatest 3 album runs in modern music history, in my opinion. Yeah. So I put this a notch below that, but it's still a very interesting record, and there's still a lot I love about this record. there is sort of like, this kind of White Album type sprawl to it that, I always sort of find interesting. It's funny for a group that, is so associated with sort of like retro 70s, 80s culture. They've got very scratchy, vinyl effects all over the records. They were really like a true CD era band in that they like really maximized that, 60, 70 minute runtime and made these like big sprawling patchwork records. Mm-hmm. So, you're always going to find some cool stuff in there, even when they do maybe, kind of go off the deep end at times.
Niko, it's no Taylor Swift 12 album run, but
I mean, who could pull that off? Who could pull that off 2 different times?
Now, are you counting the remakes as part of the
Hello Nasty Taylor's version?
Where do you put Hello Nasty?
I mean, I have gone on record multiple times saying that this is my favorite Beastie Boys record.
Your favorite?
I will be out there on the corner where the evangelists always are, and I will have my sign that says Hello Nasty is the best Beastie Boys record, and I will probably get beat up more than the evangelists do.
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, this is the one I listen to straight through the most. Like I love the Beasties a lot. I go back and listen to a lot of these songs a lot, but I will always like pick songs out. Hello Nasty is a record I can put on and I can play because it's a conversation that goes places and takes me places. And and yes, it reminds me of being 16. And like, there's that idea of like, do you like this thing or did you like it when you were 16? I'm like, Alva, what about both? And it's like, and it is kind of both of those things, but I really love this record and I love, the flow and the feeling of it. And this is my favorite Beastie Boys record and I will never apologize for that.
Niko, Stuart, this has been a journey. And I've loved every minute of it. Thank you for being here.
You should check out this band, the Beastie Boys.
They have a single
before 2005.
They have a single called Check It Out. You're going to love it.
Can't wait. All right. Incredible.
'Cause nobody can do it like Mixmaster can. Come on, I got the D-double-O style. And here we go again because it's been a while. Do me a favor, don't touch that dial. I rock from Manhattan to the Miracle Mile.
A little bit of 3 MCs and 1 DJ from the Beastie Boys. Before that, you heard my conversation with Niko Stratis. She's a culture writer at Spin, Autostraddle, and many other places. And our very own producer, Stuart Berman, who also writes for Pitchfork, Stereogum, and Apple Music. This week, the Beastie Boys album, Hello Nasty, turns 25. All right, before I go, I just wanted to acknowledge the passing of Milan Kundera. Milan died this week. He was 94 years old. One of the most renowned novels that Milan wrote is The Unbearable Lightness of Being. You might know it. Maybe you might know the 1988 movie adaptation of it. That's an adaptation starring Juliette Binoche and Daniel Day-Lewis. It's a story about love and exile, set mainly in Prague during the 60s and 70s, around the time that the Russian tanks invaded Czechoslovakia. There's an interesting little bit of sort of film trivia that you should know about. So editors actually took news footage from the invasion and they used it in the film. Take a listen to this and how they did it. Here's the film editor, Walter Murch.
I was going around to all these places in Europe saying, do you have any footage from 1968, from the invasion? Oh, yes, we have that. This is now 1968. This is filmed at the time, and it comes and smashes into a bus, which was being used as a blockade by the Czechs. So the tank was getting rid of a blockade. The great thing about all of this from an editor's point of view is that I had multiple camera coverage. This event attracted a number of people with cameras. And now we're looking at the same event from another angle. As it turned out, one of the images was at a film library in Stockholm, and another one was from the Canadian Broadcasting Company. So these pieces of film, which had filmed the same event on the same moment in August of 1968, got separated by 3,000 miles and 18 years, and then we found this footage and brought it back together again in the film.
Hey, did you catch that? He referenced a bit of CBC's connection to the film. That's an interesting little bit of film history. Hey, that was editor Walter Murch talking about the film The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Unfortunately, it turns out Milan Kundera wasn't happy with the adaptation of his novel, so much so he didn't allow anyone else to turn his books into movies. Milan Kundera died this week. He was 94 years old. For more on his life, go to cbcnews.ca. And that is it for the show today. Tomorrow on the show, we're going to have a lengthier conversation about all the things that are going wrong in Hollywood and where power is centralized. In the meantime, I hope you had a great time today. I will be here tomorrow. If you're here tomorrow, let's do this all over again. I'll see you then.